What's up, everybody? We are back for episode 16, covering chapter 16 of the novel Dune by Frank Herbert. This is the 16th episode of our Decoding Dune series, wherein I am rereading these books for the first time in like 25 years, and also kind of diving into the new films that have been produced. The first one, which was a couple years back, second part, which is coming out in early 2024, and supposedly they're filming a third part covering the initial three books of the trilogy, the Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune. And we are still in the first novel. If you're just now getting caught up with me on this, I traditionally release these episodes on Thursdays. I occasionally will miss an episode here and there, but mostly these have been on a weekly basis since we started. That's the goal anyway. So today we're up to chapter 16, and we're going to get into it here. If you haven't already done so, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update in this series or all the other things I do here on the channel. Check out the playlists, join the Discord, links are down below. I'm a little out of breath from the push-ups I was doing before I came in here. Whew, here we go. So we start off, as always, with a quote from the princess from the collected sayings of Muad'Dib. Talking about greatness being a transitory experience that is never consistent. Okay. So the person who is in the middle of the greatness or feeling that, being in the middle of that has to have a feeling for the myth he is in and must reflect what is projected. This goes into not just, it is the Messiah story, but from a different perspective. But I love looking at that. If you've ever watched, oh man, what is it? Is it it's the one where Willem Dafoe played Jesus. Is it The Last Temptation of Christ? Is it the film I'm thinking of? I love that movie because it portrayed a very realistic portrayal of someone who had, who was told that they were a Messiah and had to deal with that. So I love, that's one of the great things I think that Timothée Chalamet pulled off in the film that Denis did a couple years back, was a very, very good portrayal of a young adult feeling very, very betrayed when he finds out that he's, a test tube baby, and the whole idea that he's been bred to be this Messiah figure, and the way the people have been manipulated with superstition and things. It was very well portrayed in the film. It's a very difficult thing to deal with. But this is a great introductory quote into that whole process and the mindset there. He must reflect what is projected upon him, but must also have a strong sense of the sardonic, which is what basically detaches him from a belief in his own pretensions. Since without this quality, the sardonic part, even occasional greatness can destroy a man. Powerful prediction. We find ourselves in the Arakeen Great House with this view of the old Black Bull's head with its bloody horns being lit from below by these yellow lights. This grisly old painting of the old Duke. It's just so well described here in that paragraph. So the Duke is looking out over this scene, and he pauses for a moment to think about the poison snooper, it says, and all of it being this pattern of treacherous death. He says, is someone going to try something else tonight? Poison in the drink, poison in the food. All right, this scene is pretty powerful here. At the end of it, he reflects back and thinks to himself, I'm getting old. I'm feeling the cold hand of mortality and an old woman's greed. And he's referring to this scene where he's watching this woman clean up this puddle of water from the ground, right? And this puddle is here because of this custom wherein when basically as guests are entering, they dip their hands into the basin, slop several cups on water onto the floor, and then dry their hands on a towel, which they then fling into the puddle on the floor. After the dinner, beggars gather to get water squeezing from the towels. And the Duke is like, screw this. He's like, every time I want you to take these basins to the front door, and every time we're eating and until we finish, every beggar who calls may have a cup of water. And he looks at her, expecting her to be, like, oh, thank you. And she said she looks angry. And he's like, why is she angry? And he goes, oh, because she was probably going to sell those, so I've just stolen her livelihood for the day. And he gets pissed at himself, but he doesn't rectify it. He just turns, and that's when he has the thought of, like, an old woman's greed is what caused him to feel the cold hand of mortality. Oof. There's a whole sequence here which this is one of those things. If I was a film editor or I was preparing to write a screenplay on this whole scene here, I would probably cut out. Like, this is basically the Duke coming into this event, so to speak. Lady Jessica's there, Duncan Idaho's there, Paul is here, younger Arakeen, what does it say? Richesse? I don't know that word. Officers of the House Troop, young woman who the Duke is looking at and going, which one of those could potentially be a good fit for Paul? And we get a switch of POV now to Paul, who sees his father in the doorway, and he avoids his eyes. And he's thinking back now to the fact that he didn't want to be here in the first place, this function, but the Duke has said, you don't have a choice. This is a position you have to uphold. You're almost a man. It's your responsibility to do this. So it's a reflection on both of their perspectives, looking out over this function and the way they feel about it. I would cut that out, like, completely. If there was even the function at all, we would just have it be focused on a dialogue sequence. But I think I would skip this whole scene entirely. The Duke and Kynes arrive at Jessica's table. All right, so this interaction is actually kind of important, I think, for the overall plot of the Duke needing to rule the planet with people who are just cutthroats. So we've got this. Basically, he's a water merchant, a water shipper, Lingar Butte. Harkonnens used him but never fully controlled him, and he's basically threatening the Duke flat out about the conservatory and all these other things. And they have a back and forth banter here, which basically the Duke is thinking to himself, I'm going to have to redouble the efforts to infiltrate this guy's organization, and we have to start our own facilities immediately because he's not going to hold a club over my head. So there's definitely a back and forth banter here, which could be important if we're going the political route for the scenes. But these are things that are fascinating to me that didn't show up in any of the film versions that I've seen, unless they've transported them to another character. I don't remember ever seeing this argument played out. This is also a moment for Dr. Kynes to basically get up in Jessica's face, and because he's really trying to sort out this prophecy thing. So he's like, he says his thoughts were overwhelmed at last by the words of the prophecy, and they shall share your most precious dream. So he speaks directly and bluntly to Jessica and says, do you bring the shortening of the way? And this is in the middle of this banter between between the Duke and the water shipper. Shortening of the way, it says here in the old tongue, translated as the Kwisatz Haderach. It says here the planetologist's odd question went unnoticed by the others. And it says Kynes was hyper-focused, basically paying attention to Jessica's reaction to his question. And Jessica's thinking to herself, did the Missionaria Protectiva plant that legend here too? Now in the film, it's blatant that she knows that it's been planted here. So this is a slight difference in the film variation and the book variation. Okay, there's also a great sequence here about this smuggler that Gurney invited that wanted to be here. Smuggler called Esmar Tuick, powerful man among the smugglers. How it wanted it to be here. The Duke's not exactly happy with it. Wants there to be more Fremen. And as they're having this discussion, Jessica's thinking to herself, the smuggler, the importance of him is also not just the fact that he's here to prove to the others that the Duke is ready to, Don't call my bluff, is what the Duke is saying, because I'll use the smuggler to do these other things to just get around the issues. But she also says the smuggler here controls fast ships and can be bribed, which means we can have a way out, a door of escape from Arrakis if things fall. So he's giving a speech here too, very ominous, about things, lifting his water flagon, claiming that many customs are going to change underneath me. Upended his remaining half of his flagon of water onto the floor, knowing that everyone else. Jessica's paying attention to things, watching Paul and everything, and she notices that Kynes emptied his flagon into a container beneath his jacket and smiled at Jessica when he realized she caught on. He was completely unembarrassed by his action. Don't waste water, man. That's great. Ooh, Jessica realizes as they're sitting here that the guild bank representative is a Harkonnen agent. Says he had the Getty Prime speech pattern subtly masked, but she caught on to it as readily as if he had announced himself. And she's wondering to herself now if this means that the guild had taken sides against House Atreides. And while the thought shocked her, she's listening. This whole sequence here where Kynes has this back and forth with the banker, where he's basically referring to the Fremen as scum, and they drink the blood of the dead, and Kearns is like, let me actually fix that little lie you just told, because Lady Jessica deserves to know the truth. We do take the water, but only from, they don't need it anymore. And the guy is like, basically calls him out and says, "You've gone native," which is true, but he says, "You've been with the Fremen so long that you've lost all sensibilities." And Kearns looks at him and says, "Are you challenging me, sir?" And Jessica realizes in this moment that the man is terrified of Dr. Kynes. And then Kynes gives a speech here, because he had previously wasn't sure what he thought about the Atreides, and now he says, "Our host and hostess are quite capable of deciding for themselves when they've been insulted. Brave people they are, who understand defensive honor. We may all attest to their courage by the fact they are here now on Arrakis." And she noticed here that Leto was enjoying this, even though most of the other people at the table were not. They're all in a panic. The smuggler was also enjoying it, watching Kynes as well. She also notices that through all of this, the smuggler had shown the aspect of an aide ready to leap to Kynes' assistance. So obviously there was some sort of an accord here that they're not aware of, but she sees it. And of course, this all proves that Dr. Kynes' assessment of the Atreides has completely changed, which clues Leto into that he's winning the battle that he needed to win. Oh, so the Duke. Okay, as they're having, there's a continued ongoing exchange between Kynes and the water shipper dude, and it says the Duke here comes to a sudden realization that the Kynes' attitude had changed when Jessica had spoken of holding conservatory plants in a trust for Arrakis later on, as opposed to taking them for their own benefit. And the discussion here is about how, under the right conditions, Arrakis could be turned into a lush green planet, and the water shipper's like, "It's impossible. Our laboratory's data shows differently." And Kynes is like, "Well, actually, if you factor in the local fauna and flora and everything else." And so Leto he's getting clued in here that everything here, the reason Kynes' relationship towards them changed was when they showed an interest in helping better the future of Arrakis, as opposed to just taking the spice and profiting from it. So they've earned trust by, showing good faith. And so he asks now what Dr. Kynes would need to set up a self-sustaining system here. This is really brilliant. So at this point, and I've read this book years ago, and I've also seen the Sci-Fi Channel version, the film recently. So one of the big things is actually we haven't seen it in the new films yet. So I'm going to say something that might be spoiler if you haven't read beyond this or you haven't watched other film versions. There's a huge underground reservoir of water underneath the surface. And it's a big part of why the Fremen are able to live underground undetected, because they have water and they've been cultivating gardens and all this other stuff. And there's this point of the conversation where the Duke wants to know, what would you need, Dr. Kynes, to make that reality happen? And Butte keeps going on about there's not enough water, not enough water. And the Duke's like, "Shut up. I want an answer. Is there enough water, Dr. Kynes?" And Kynes um, kind of lies a little bit here, and Jessica catches it. Um, he stares at his plate, and when the Duke demands again, "Is there enough water?" Kind says, "There maybe," like, and he's faking uncertainty here. And Paul realizes at the same time that there absolutely is enough water, but Kynes does not wish that fact to be known. As this is going on, a trooper comes in, and Duke Leto says, "You have to forgive me. A matter has arisen that requires my personal attention. Paul, take over as host for me." Paul stands, wanting to know what had just happened. The Duke then commands Gurney take Paul's place at the table. When dinner's over, I may need you to bring him to the field CP. What does CP stand for? The Duke then makes a statement to everyone. Says, "I must ask that no one leave until our house guard says it's safe. You will be perfectly secure as long as you remain here. We'll have this little trouble cleared up shortly." There's a code in that message that Paul recognizes. A security issue, not a violence issue, of course. All right, the POV is switching back and forth here between Paul and Jessica. Paul and Jessica as they're dealing with the banker, and there's some back and forth banter. And Paul basically makes a snide remark. This is another really long chapter, by the way, everybody. Paul makes a really snide remark to the banker, and then tempers kind of explode, and Jessica has to step in. Paul's wondering, why did she step in? Um, Jessica makes a statement here. The way she says it is something I need to get back up and look. "My son displays a general garment, and you claim it's cut to your fit." Now, part of this is the code, but I also like the way that basically Paul made a generalized statement, and you took that, applied it to yourself, and basically you invented something to be offended over. And I have said this so many times about so many subjects. It's great to see it written in this way. It's basically way too many people just invent outrage because they feel like a generalized statement has been applied to them personally, and they take things way too personally when oftentimes statements that are made or observations we make in life are just generalizations. I don't mean you when I say you. I mean, when I say all of you, I'm talking to all of you, not you, the individual. So, but people feel weird about that kind of stuff sometimes. It's a great way to put this. The end of this chapter is essentially the Duke relaying back to Jessica at the end of this function that the Harkonnens try to get in a shipment of laser guns, which means they've probably succeeded with other shipments. And Jessica thinking about the reaction of what happens when a laser gun and shield explosion takes place. More powerful than atomics, but could kill only the gunner and his shielded target, which left her with unease. So, um, that's where we leave off this chapter. It was a long chapter, but also leave us with a cliffhanger of not knowing what's happening next. So stay tuned to next week to find out. See you then, everybody. Stay safe. Happy reading.